Hello there, Johannes Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. Today, I also have an announcement to make. I have a project going on right now, something I worked on over the 4th of July weekend. Actually, I've been working on it for about 2 or 3 years now, but this past weekend, I decided to sit down and sketch out the 30 chapters for my upcoming book, The Lost History of Bourbon. That's right, I have done a book called The Lost History of Tennessee Whiskey. We're going to dive into the origins of bourbon whiskey and got some hints over here as to some of the things that I will be discussing in that book. And we're going to do a whiskey tasting as well. Now, you see Buffalo Trace and you go, okay, so what does Buffalo Trace have to do with the origins of bourbon? In reality, the whiskey, nothing. However, the Buffalo Trace is the path that the buffalo trampled over to get across the land, and this was a path that was actually used by early travelers, and that path, of course, goes to Leestown, where Buffalo Trace is today. However, it also went through Bourbon County, and so there are ties into the Buffalo Trace and Bourbon County. And it actually plays into the story of how bourbon became the name of bourbon whiskey. I'm not giving away my secrets quite yet, okay? That's what this book is going to be about. It's going to be about proving, first of all, that bourbon did not get its name from Bourbon Street in New Orleans. It got its name from Bourbon County in Kentucky. But you're going, wait a second, maybe you know of one brand of whiskey that came out of Bourbon County, Kentucky, and it's a modern brand, which is Hatfield and Company. Well, I got to tell you, there were a lot more distillers way back when. There's been a lot of wives' tales told about Bourbon County and why it really isn't the source for the name bourbon. But there are names that I have come across, such as Jacob Spears. Some people will know Jacob Spears, and some people even call him the father of bourbon because he actually lived in Bourbon County and made whiskey and was one of the early pioneers of the Kentucky whiskey industry. However, there were many other names that I came across, such as Pew, very interesting connections with them, the Ewalts, another name, the Millers. Now, the Millers tie deeply into this story, and you may know one of the brands that has come back, and that is the Chicken Cock brand. That's what I'm going to be doing a tasting of today. Now, I think I have actually done a story about James A. Miller and the origins of the Chicken Cock brand in a previous tasting. I'm going to dive full force into that. I've learned more since doing that tasting so long ago, and I want to do a tasting of this whiskey right now because I think this particular Chicken Cock whiskey may be as close or even closer to what James A. Miller was actually making back then. We think of bourbon as being corn whiskey. However, James A. Miller used wheat and he used rye. So you may go, okay, well, those are flavoring grains. Yes, but there's a possibility that he was just actually using those two. There was a time during the Civil War, in fact, when all bourbon distillers, if they wanted to distill anything, they weren't going to be able to distill corn because the federal government told them they couldn't because they needed to ration corn. And so they actually outlawed the distilling of corn. Now, all of these distilleries in Kentucky could have shut down, yes, but did they? Well, there was still whiskey being produced. So these are the things that I really want to cover in this stuff that nobody has ever talked about. The history of Bourbon County in regards to whiskey has just been completely ignored, and it makes absolutely no sense once you dig into the information that I have. Like I said, 30 chapters I have written or will be writing for this, and I'm going to release those chapters as podcast episodes. So you're actually going to get to hear kind of the rough draft of the book before I solidify it as I go through and write it chapter to chapter. So exciting times for me. I am so ready to get this book done because I know the history of Bourbon County and its whiskey history and why Bourbon is named after that county, but not a lot of other people do because unfortunately history has been spending some time ignoring it. Now, this whiskey is actually not distilled in Bourbon County, this Chicken Cock rye whiskey. It is distilled in Bardstown, Kentucky. It is actually a sourced whiskey from Bardstown Bourbon Company. Now, Chicken Cock actually does have a tasting room, really nice tasting room and bar down in Bardstown at the Center Square. So if you're ever in town, stop in there. They have a lot of the old Chicken Cock paraphernalia in there, some old bottles. Another whiskey I think I've talked about in the past, E.G. Booze, which has a very interesting history of its own. What I love about this whiskey, it's a 95.5 rye, but it's not an Indiana 95.5 rye. And it is so strong on the spearmint. I mean, it is like I just opened a pack of Wrigley's gum. There's a nice oak note along with this. But that spearmint is so strong. I know there's other stuff in there, but that is definitely the dominant smell here. Cheers. Really nice mouthfeel. Bardstown Bourbon Company makes some really great whiskeys, and you don't necessarily have to be looking for the Bardstown brand. They're making a lot of other stuff as well. To the specs of the people who are requesting that whiskey. So it's really, really interesting to see the stuff that they produced over there. And that's actually when I first heard of Chicken Cock, because the first time I toured Bardstown Bourbon Company, they had it in their gift shop. And I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting brand. Where does that come from? So big history, and I will definitely cover it. On the palate, though, this whiskey, it's very soft. And again, people who don't like a heavy rush of pepper and heat are going to like this whiskey. It has a nice light peppery note to the palate. I get a lot more butterscotch on this on the front, and then honey, and then it kind of keeps that little minty, herbally note all the way through to the finish. I will say that the finish is a little short. This whiskey, the one that I have, and this may have changed since I've gotten this bottle. It's about a year old. I've had this bottle. This is a straight bourbon whiskey. I mean, straight rye whiskey, sorry. But it is actually aged, it says aged 2 years on there. So it is still somewhat on the young side. But you know what? When it comes to rye whiskey, many times I like young ryes because much more of that grain comes through. For me, the critical point in releasing a young rye whiskey is just to make sure that kind of the bready notes get out of there, the yeasty notes, that sort of thing. Let's get all the tannins worked out of this thing and get it to where it's really bringing us the flavor of the grain rather than bringing us the flavor of the barrel or the flavor of the yeast in excess. So I enjoy this one, and I know you've probably seen Chicken Cock stuff on the shelf. Some of it's kind of pricey. I have one, Red Stave's really, really good, but it's also 100 and plus, a bottle. This one is going to be much more in the affordable range, and if you like rye whiskeys and you want one that is maybe a little bit softer, this one isn't quite as aggressive. I think it'd do really nice in a cocktail, but I like to drink it just as it is. It could use maybe a slight bit more mouthfeel on the finish. As I say, it fades a little quickly, but still very nice and clean and a well done whiskey. Hope you enjoyed this. Have you had Chicken Cock's whiskeys before? And I am taking the week off from my Whiskey Lore podcast because I am going to get this introduction episode ready, and so I didn't want to rush it. I'm going to take a little extra time with it, and I'm I'm looking forward to telling the story of Bourbon County because it is a really interesting story and it needs to be told. Until next time, cheers and Slanjava. Lemony also. Yeah, nice lemon notes in there.